I wish I had spoken up sooner, but I didn't. And for a long time, I told myself that staying quiet was the gracious thing to do, that it was what my mother would have called keeping the peace. She used to say that, my mother. Keep the peace, Miriam. Except my name isn't Miriam. And the peace, as it turned out, was never mine to keep. My name is Florence. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years teaching literature at a small college in Vermont, which means I have spent the better part of my adult life paying close attention to the way people use and misuse words. I retired 4 years ago, moved to a smaller house in Connecticut after my husband passed, and did my best to build a life that felt full rather than just busy. I have a garden. I have a book club. I have my son. My son's name is Martin. He's 38, works in finance, lives in the kind of apartment in Manhattan that I will never fully understand the cost of. He is kind and smart, and if I'm being honest, a little conflict-averse in the way that men who love their mothers sometimes are. He married his wife, I'll call her his wife because that is what she is, 2 years ago. Her name is Celeste. She is 34, beautiful in a sharp, careful way, and she works in international business development for a company that I still cannot entirely explain to my book club friends. I want to be fair to Celeste, that matters to me. She was not cruel in the ways people are when they intend to be cruel. She was cruel in the quieter, more sophisticated way, the way that requires an audience and a certain confidence that no one will ever call you out. She was always polite to my face. Always. She said, of course, when I offered to bring something to dinner. She laughed at my jokes just enough. She called me Florence, never Mom, which I respected, actually, and she always made sure Martin was in the room when she complimented me. It was the kind of politeness that keeps everyone comfortable except the person it's directed at. I noticed things, small things, the way she'd redirect conversation when I started a story, the way she'd glance at her phone when I spoke, the way she'd say, Martin, didn't you tell your mother about that? Putting words in his mouth, making herself the one who remembered, the one who kept track. I noticed. I didn't say anything. I told myself I was overthinking it. I told myself she was simply a private person. Then my son called me in October. He sounded excited in the way he used to sound as a boy when something big was happening at school. That breathless, slightly too casual voice that means the opposite of casual. He said there was a Japanese delegation coming to New York for a major partnership deal. His wife's company had been working on it for over a year. It was, he said, a very big deal. The lead representative was a man named Mr. Fujita. He'd been with the parent company in Osaka for decades, was known for being extraordinarily traditional in the way he conducted business, and had specifically requested that the dinner be small, intimate, and family-oriented. He did not like formal banquets. He wanted to feel, Martin said, like he was being welcomed into someone's life, not auditioned for a contract. Celeste, he told me, had suggested that I come. I remember standing in my kitchen holding the phone, looking out at the garden, trying to understand what I was feeling. Something moved in me. Warmth, maybe. The thought that she wanted me there, that she'd extended that invitation, it meant something. I said yes without hesitating. What I didn't say, and what I had never mentioned to either of them, was that I had spent 4 years in Japan in my 30s, before Martin was born. Before his father and I settled in Vermont, I had been on a research fellowship in Kyoto, studying the translation of post-war Japanese literature, and I had learned the language, learned it properly, not tourist Japanese, not conversational Japanese, but the kind of Japanese you learn when you are young and hungry and sitting in small rooms with people who have no patience for anything less than full attention. I got reasonably good, not perfect, but good. I could follow a conversation. I could read a room. I never mentioned it because it never came up. It's one of those things about yourself that you simply carry. I hadn't been back to Japan in decades. I don't bring it up at dinner parties. It's just part of who I am, filed somewhere between former long-distance runner and can identify almost any bird by its call, things that are true but rarely useful. Until that night, we met at a restaurant in Midtown, one of those quietly expensive Japanese restaurants where the lighting is perfect and the menu is 3 pages of things you need to ask about. There were 6 of us, Martine and Celeste, Mr. Fujita and his assistant, a young woman named Keiko, a senior colleague of Celeste from the New York office, a man I'll call her colleague, and me. Mr. Fujita was in his late 60s, compact and serious-faced, with the kind of stillness that takes years to develop. He bowed when he was introduced to me, and I bowed back, probably a little deeper than I needed to, and something flickered in his expression. Just a small thing, a slight adjustment, the way a person looks when something registers that they weren't expecting. Celeste introduced me as Martin's mother. She said very smoothly that I had retired from teaching and that I was enjoying my garden and my books. She said it the way you might describe a piece of furniture, affectionate, but essentially decorative. Mr. Fujita asked through Keiko whether I had ever visited Japan. Before I could answer, Celeste said very warmly, Florence has never been much of a traveler, I don't think. She's more of a homebody, which is a beautiful thing. She smiled at me when she said it. I smiled back. I have actually, I said. I was in Kyoto for several years. A long time ago. There was a brief adjustment at the table. Mr. Fujita looked at me with more attention. Keiko translated what I'd said, and he responded, in Japanese, that Kyoto was a city of considerable depth, and that not many Westerners took the time to truly know it. I understood every word. I said in Japanese that I agreed, and that my years there had changed me in ways I was still discovering. The silence that followed was the most interesting silence I have experienced in a very long time. Mr. Fujita looked at me for a long moment. Then he laughed, a real laugh, full and surprised, and said, in Japanese, you speak beautifully. Where did you study? I told him. We slipped into conversation the way you slip into water you already know the temperature of. He had studied literature, too. We had read some of the same writers. He asked about my research. I told him about the fellowship, the small apartment in Fushimi, the professor who had terrified me into fluency. At some point I became aware, the way you become aware of weather changing, that the table had gone very quiet. I looked up. Martin was watching me with an expression I can only describe as discovering something. That particular look of realizing your parent was a person before they were your parent. Keiko was smiling. Celeste's colleague was refilling his water glass, looking at the table. Celeste was very still. Her face had done what faces do when the social script has been removed, and there's nothing underneath to replace it. She hadn't known. Of course she hadn't known. I'd never told her. But what struck me in that moment was not surprise on her face. It was something more complicated. It was the look of someone recalculating, running back through a conversation, checking what had been said. And then I understood why. Because approximately 20 minutes earlier, before Mr. Fujita and Keiko had arrived, while Martin had stepped away to speak with the host and Celeste's colleague had gone to the bar, Celeste and I had been sitting alone at the table for the first time in, I think, our entire relationship. She was on her phone, the way she usually was. I was looking at the menu, and she had made a call, or received one, I don't remember, and she'd spoken in Japanese. She was fluent. I hadn't known that. I suppose she hadn't known that I would know. She said to whoever was on the other end of that call that the dinner was a formality, that she had it handled, that the only complication was that her mother-in-law was coming, and that she'd insisted because it would look warm and family-oriented for the clients, but that the woman was, and I am translating this as precisely as I can, the kind of person who means well and understands nothing. She said she'd spent 2 years managing me. She said that older women from that generation had a way of making everything about themselves without realizing they were doing it. She said, and this is the part that I have turned over in my mind many times since, that Martin still hadn't fully separated from me and that it was something she was working on. I set down my menu. I looked at the centerpiece, a small arrangement of branches and white flowers, and I breathed in the way I learned to breathe when I was running long distances, when the temptation was to tighten up, and the only thing that helped was to deliberately open. She hung up the phone just as Martin came back to the table. I didn't say anything. Not then. I made a decision quietly, the way I make most important decisions, by simply knowing, without drama, that I had all the information I needed and that I would figure out what to do with it. What I did not know was that Mr. Fujita's assistant would arrive 20 minutes later and that a dinner meant to be a professional formality would turn into something else entirely. After Mr. Fujita and I had been talking for a while, long enough that the conversation had moved into territory that was genuinely warm, genuinely curious, both of us leaning in a little, the way people do when they find unexpected common ground. He said something that shifted the evening. He said, in Japanese, that he had been uncertain about this partnership, that his company had been approached before by firms that understood the business side but not the spirit of what they were trying to build. that he valued relationships above all things, and that one of the concerns he had come into this dinner with was whether the people he would be working with understood that, whether they valued what was durable over what was immediately profitable. He was looking at me when he said it. I glanced at Celeste. She was watching us with an expression she had worked very hard to make neutral. I said to Mr. Fujita, still in Japanese, that I couldn't speak to the business, but that the people at this table were ones I had known for some time, and that I believed good relationships were built on honesty and on a willingness to see things clearly, even when it was uncomfortable. He nodded slowly. Then he said, and I am quite certain Celeste's Japanese was good enough to follow this, that he appreciated that in his experience you learned a great deal about a family by watching how the younger generation treated the older one. He said it plainly, not pointedly, just as a thing he had found to be true. The table was quiet for a moment. Then Martin said, not knowing the full weight of what had just been exchanged, well, Florence raised me right. I'll take the credit for that. He was trying to lighten things. He's always been good at that. Mr. Fujita laughed. So did Keiko. Celeste laughed too, a beat late. Dinner continued. It was, by any external measure, a success. Mr. Fujita ate well, asked thoughtful questions, seemed genuinely engaged. He and I exchanged a few more words in Japanese about Kyoto in winter, about a particular novelist whose work I had translated a small portion of once, about his own daughter who was studying in London. By the end of the evening, he had asked Keiko to give me a small card with his personal contact information, which she did with a little bow. Celeste watched that happen. On the way out, Mr. Fujita shook Martin's hand and said, in English, his English was careful and precise, that he was looking forward to working with the team, and that it had been a pleasure to meet his family. He said the word family with a kind of deliberateness. Martin thanked him and looked genuinely happy. In the car afterward, Martin driving, Celeste in the front passenger seat, me in the back, no one said much for a few minutes. The city moved past the windows. I watched it. Then Celeste said, without turning around, I didn't know you spoke Japanese. You never asked, I said. There was a silence. You must have understood. She stopped. Yes, I said. I did. Martin glanced in the rearview mirror. He looked between us. He's a smart man. He understood, in the way smart people sometimes understand things before they're ready to, that something significant had happened. What did I miss? He said. Neither of us answered right away. Celeste said, nothing. Everything was fine. I said, we should talk sometime, Martin, the three of us. But not tonight. Tonight was good. Let's let it be good. He nodded slowly. Okay, he said. We drove in silence for another mile or so. I looked out the window at the lights of the city, at all those millions of lives happening simultaneously, and I thought about what it means to mean well and understand nothing. I thought about whether it was possible for someone to love another person and still diminish them without realizing it. I thought about my son and what he might choose and whether I could make peace with whatever that was. I thought about my husband, who had been gone 4 years and who would have squeezed my hand in the car and whispered something ridiculous to make me laugh. The thing about getting older is that you have context for almost everything. That's the part no one tells you when you're young, that all those years accumulate into a kind of understanding that is genuinely hard-won and genuinely useful, and then the world treats it as quaint, as decoration. I have spent 67 years learning how to read a room. I have read rooms in Vermont and Kyoto and London and, now, a quiet car in Manhattan where my daughter-in-law was trying to figure out what I would do next. I wasn't going to do anything dramatic. That's not who I am. What I was going to do was have a conversation with my son, a real one, overdue, about what our relationship actually looked like and what he was willing to stand for. Not against his wife. For his mother. Those are different things, and the difference matters. We had that conversation 3 weeks later. Martin came alone. Celeste knew he was coming. They had talked, and we sat at my kitchen table with coffee and the specific quiet of a Sunday morning in November, and I told him, clearly and without bitterness, what I had heard in that restaurant before dinner, what she had said, what it meant to me. He listened. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't know. I know you didn't, I said. That's not. He stopped. Started again. She's not always. He stopped again. Martin, I said, I'm not asking you to choose. I'm asking you to see. He looked up at me. I can do that, he said. I believe him. I do. He is still figuring out how to be a husband and a son at the same time, and that is genuinely hard, and I have enough grace left in me to understand that. What I no longer have is the patience to pretend that something is fine when it isn't. I spent too many years doing that, keeping the peace, as my mother used to say, and the peace never thanked me for it. The partnership with Mr. Fujita's company went forward. Martin told me a few weeks later, kind of sheepishly, that Mr. Fujita had asked about me, had asked how Martin's mother was doing. He'd told him I was well. I got a card in the mail in December, from Kyoto. A small thing, a New Year's card, the traditional kind, with careful handwriting and a note about the novelist we had discussed. He had reread one of her books and thought I might appreciate a passage he had marked. I stood in my hallway and read it twice. Then I put it on my refrigerator, next to a drawing my nephew made when he was 5, next to a photograph of my husband and me in Vermont in the fall, next to everything else that reminds me who I actually am. You spend a long time when you're older worrying about becoming invisible, about being managed and redirected and described to other people as though you're not in the room. And sometimes that worry takes up so much space that you forget, I forgot, that the answer to invisibility isn't to get louder. It's to simply keep being exactly who you are in full and trust that eventually the room will catch up. I speak Japanese. I grow dahlias. I have read almost every novel Flannery O'Connor ever wrote. I loved one man for 39 years, and I have missed him every single day since he left. I am not a bird. I am not someone to be managed. I am Florence, and I have been here the whole time.